Materials we'll be using for this project, I have an Ultimate design board in the background, beeswax thread conditioner, my flush cutters, binder clip to help secure the project to the board, my 1mm leather, micro seal-on to match my leather, tape measure, my button, which will accommodate 3 passings of the 1.0 leather. The holes must be large enough to do that. GS Hypo Cement, 3 colors of 8/0 Miyuki seed beads, tweezers, and my thread burner. First, I'm going to show you how to assemble your project, strap it up to this board, and begin to cut 3 pieces of my 1mm leather into 29-inch pieces. I'm also going to cut 1 6-inch piece for the silk wrap at the end. I've cut my 3 29-inch pieces of leather. I'm matching them up at the tips here. And you'll see I also cut a 6-inch piece of leather that I'm going to hold to the side for the end of the project when we silk wrap. And I'm going to take my flush cutters and at an angle cut those 3 pieces of leather, feed it through the button shank, bringing it down to the middle. So I just want to make sure that my ends match up here, so I'm going to somewhat gather them all, and then I'll adjust it by pulling my button. At the ends of my leather, I've got 6 pieces here. I'm going to tie a simple overhand knot, just like so. Next, I'm going to take a scrap piece of micro seal-on, about a yard or so, cut that, and we're going to be the bottom here, threading it through where the knot is. So there's 3 pieces of leather on one side and 3 pieces of leather on the other. And I'm going to bring this around the back side of my board, just like so. So I've got 2 equal tails of my micro seal-on. I'm going to wrap it around my button loop up here, and as I pull, I'm going to create tension. Using your finger as though you're wrapping a present, just go ahead and tie a knot. You'll cut this off later, so you just want to make sure it's pretty secure but not terribly tight. I'm going to bring my button up so that it's at the edge of my board here. Now you see we've got our whole project strapped up. I'll be using this binder clip later as we'll be working with multiple cords to hold them off to the side. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring this underneath all of my base cords. And to help lift this project up, I recommend you take your spool of micro seal-on and just slip it underneath there. That way you have room to work underneath. Okay. Maybe moving this up a little bit more. I'm going to macrame with all 3 of these pieces around my leather base cords. As you can see, I did a few macrame knots here. I'll do one more just for clarification. So I'm going to move my micro seal-on up so I have more room to work with. So I'm going to do one more macrame knot by bringing all my threads around. And that should suffice. Now I'm going to be separating these into groups of 2, and I like to choose the ones that are closest together. A ladder in this portion, a ladder in this portion, and a ladder in this portion. But I'm only going to be working with one section at a time, so I'm going to choose the one that's easiest to get to, which will be this section here. Stick my micro seal-on up underneath, scooting it down a bit, giving that some separation. I'm going to take one of my micro seal-on threads on my right and hold the other ones off to the side. I'm going to take one from my left and hold the other two off to the side. This is where the binder clip comes in handy because I'll wrap these behind the board and binder clip them out of my way. Now I'm going to begin the laddering portion of my bracelet, but first I'm going to complete one macrame knot around these two pieces of my leather. Repeating on the other side to secure that knot. Now I'm going to begin laddering my first section. My micro seal-on under, up, and through. One more time. Under, up, and through before adding my first bead. I'm going to ladder on my first A-dot Miyuki seed bead, and I've decided to start with my Pearl Ivory Ceylon. But reviewing laddering, I've got my A-dot seed bead here. I'm going to go ahead and thread it on my right piece of micro seal-on like that. Holding it in place, I'm going to take my left thread, going back in the opposite direction of that same bead, pulling taut, under, up, and through with my micro seal-on. I'm going to add two this time. Now I'm going to add three, weaving them into place as before. And we're going to repeat this process. We're going to keep going until we've reached our desired length. And for me, I'm making a 6.5 inch bracelet. So the actual laddered portion of this bracelet is going to be 6.5 inches, starting from where the first bead begins to where your last bead ends. You're going to have a little extra space right here and at the end, which is good because that space will be taken up when you're braiding. So I'm going to keep going with this section. You can add 4 if you want to, but I'm going to stick to a pattern of 3 for this video. I've completed my ladder portion of this section, and as you can see, I graduated back down to my single bead here. I'm going to complete another macrame knot to secure this in place for the moment, but before I do that, I'm just going to take my micro seal-on and I'm going to kind of run it along behind my beads here. It'll give it a little space, and as you're braiding, that space will be really important so that the beads don't buckle up on each other. So moving it towards the end here, and keep in mind I also made sure that this was 6.5 inches from tip to tip. When I scoot this bead up, it'll be more accurate. So I went under, up, and through one more time. So I'll cross this over, and I'm going to do one macrame knot. And you see how this is coming apart and the knots aren't holding? That's when I take my beeswax right here, and I just want to coat a little bit. That'll help it stick as you're macrameing. dab a little tiny bit of glue on this knot to allow it to dry. We're going to start to work on another section. We'll move these threads off to the side or around the board, binder clipping them out of our way. And we're going to work on an entirely different section, bringing our micro sew-on spool up and under. This one will kind of be pushed to the side a little bit. Now I've chosen to take these two threads since they're right next to each other, and I'm going to repeat the process. I'm going to macrame around these base cords, continue to ladder but in a different color this time. I'm going to go with my champagne. I'm going to go ahead and macrame a few knots just to get my cords in the ideal placement. Now I'm going to begin the laddering process. I'm going to give these cords a little bit more separation here. Bringing my threads under, up, and through in opposite directions. And you'll know because it'll pull them apart when you pull them in opposite directions. One more time as we're adding the first bead. Threading through one direction. Taking the left cord, threading through the opposite direction of the same hole, weaving it into place. And we're going to do exactly the same thing that we did with the previous row here, or the previous part of our braid. And I'm going to continue to do that until it meets the other side. So as you can see, we've finished our second section, and I'm going to macrame a few stitches right down here. I'm going to cross my threads over and go into a macrame stitch. Allowing that to dry. Now it's really difficult at this point to get to this third section, so I'm just going to turn my whole project, twist it around. Actually, I don't have to take it off the board, which is great. All of these bottom threads here, I'm going to binder clip off to the side. I twisted my project around so I could easily access my final two pieces of leather here. I've got my remaining two threads, and I'm going to be introducing the silver A-dot Miyuki seed beads. I'm going to go ahead and ladder that on in the same fashion as the other two. I'll see you on the other side. Alright, so now we've completed our final section. Turn this entire thing around, cut the thread that is tying my project up on the board. So I cut that off. We're going to just slide that out of our way for now. Flip the project back around and kind of straighten out all of your tails here. The knot that we created at the end is going to come undone. And we're going to separate those pieces. Now what I like to do is take a random piece of micro sew-on, about 6 inches to a foot, and as we did before, I'm just going to go ahead and bring it around my button up here. Tie a simple double knot around. This is going to be temporary. We're going to cut this off. But I'm going to take my binder clip This up here, and at this point we've got our 3 strands, and we're going to go ahead and just loosely start to braid them together, making sure that the tails don't get all knotted up at the ends. Take your time, and you'll see that beads will start to kind of pop out. Since this bracelet is going to be a cuff, that once it's braided and you twist it around, it'll start to curve in this way, which is wonderful when it's on. You don't want to make your braid too tight, but you don't want to make it too loose either. So I just kind of braid it, kind of push things in place. And then once I'm satisfied with my braid, I'm going to come down here to the very end, and I'm going to gather all of your base cords being your leather, right there in the center. You can come to the very end here, like we did in the very beginning of the project, and tie all of your leather cords in an temporary overhand knot. 3 of your micro seal-on strands are on the left, and 3 are on the right. We're going to secure this project back up to the board like we did in the very beginning by cutting a miscellaneous strand of micro seal-on that's about a foot long, wrapping it around this button loop here, bringing it through the tails here. I've cut my foot-long piece. I'm going to now use it to strap this up on the board, and this previous piece that we were using, I'm just gonna cut that away so I don't confuse myself. Sliding this down so you can see it, I'm gonna bring my spare piece of micro seal-on through the leather at the very end. Bring it up. And over on the other side here. Bringing it around the button. I'm doing the same thing that we did in the very beginning. I'm just showing you one more time. Tying it like it's a present. I'm gonna bring this back down so my button is now on top. Kind of retighten this up a little bit. You're in the final stretch, so just take your time with this part. Excuse me. And now I'm going to take the 3 threads on my right, the 3 threads on my left, and I'm going to use them to macrame for about 1/4 of an inch or so. Grab your micro seal-on and put it underneath here to raise everything up a bit. I might bring one of my threads over here from the left to the right, just kind of depending on where I want that braid to end. Very carefully, I'm going to begin to macrame all of this in place. Making sure that's pretty tight. Two more knots. One. and 2. I'm going to go ahead and glue right underneath so that when I finish my last couple of knots, that glue will sit right underneath them. We've reached the end where we're going to start creating our button loop. So, moving this up the board slightly, I'm going to put a grouping of the 3 cords next to each other on one side and a grouping of another 3 cords on the other side. And I can keep this separated if I want. I can stick my beeswax in between so that doesn't go anywhere. I'm going to leave one of my macrame threads from each side out. So I tucked these underneath the seal-on to keep them out of my way here. Just wanted you to see that. Now we'll bring it back in. Don't worry if these start to bunch up towards the end, you can always adjust them up the braid a little bit later on. Grouping, I'm going to start on my left side here, just because it's a little bit easier, and I'm going to show you what the process is. I'm going to bring one of these pieces underneath, up through the middle, and then I'm going to begin my first macrame loop. So in the P position, under, up, and through, pull. I'm going to be creating macrame stitches for the entirety of the button loop. But what we're going to do is about 6 stitches in, I'm actually going to take my flush cutters and I'm going to cut one of these pieces of leather at an angle and continue to macrame it in. So we go from having 6 tails of leather to 4, 2 in each side. So that when we go to create our overhand knot at the very end here, it's not overwhelmingly large. So I'm going to continue to macrame for about 5 or 6 more stitches. And remember, you can use your beeswax to coat this thread so that the macrame stitches stay in place. So I've done about 5 stitches here. I'm going to take my flush cutters and very carefully I'm going to separate the one that's laying on top here from the other 2 underneath. And I'm going to cut at an angle one of those pieces of leather away. You can go back and kind of trim it to clean it up. And where I created that nice taper, I'm going to just dab some glue over it, continuing to macrame over that tapered piece. And you'll see this will want to go back underneath where that 3rd piece of leather is, so just use your tweezers to slide it up before you tighten. I've moved my beeswax out of the way because I've macrameed enough and it's kind of staying in place. So I'm going to just continue. As you can see, the 3rd piece of leather that we had cut at an angle here kind of blends seamlessly into the other 2. It merges real well. So I'm going to continue to macrame until a point where I'm ready to stop, which will be at After I take my bracelet off the board, I'll check to see if my button fits in here. And then I'm going to repeat the same process on the other side. I started the other side here. I was at the point where I needed to taper my leather, so I went ahead and separated that strand. Cutting it at an angle with my flush cutters. Now I'm going to repeat the same process by going back and gluing right there, so that when I macrame over that tapered piece, it'll fit nice and snugly inside the macrame knots. I took the project off the board at this point to make sure that my button fits, and I happen to have a bracelet with the same button that I'm using on this one. So I just went ahead and took it off the board, and once I was confident that it would slide through, I put it back on. Now I'm going to take my threads that are already kind of going in the same direction, so my thread on the right from the left side over here is going this way. My thread on the right over here is also going to the right, and then my left threads are over on the left side. I'm going to macrame using both threads to join the base cords back together. Under, up, and through. Joining all of the leather pieces together. You can kind of pinch here at the end as well. Repeat the process on the other side. At this point, I like to dab a little bit of hypo cement onto these knots to keep those threads from slipping, and I'll tie one more knot using my tweezers to help me out here. Now I'm going to take the left threads, I'm going to separate my leather tails, 2 over on the left, 2 over on the right, going down through the middle with my tweezers, bringing those right threads up and through the middle, almost as though we're going to ladder, but we're not. We're just going to bring them up through the middle so that when that glue dries, pulling kind of taut, we're going to allow that glue to dry. Now it's time to go back up here. Using my thread burner, this piece that we left alone, I'm going to bring it through the tip of my thread burner, get it right where I want it to singe, push the button, let it go. That way it'll cauterize right in there. I'm going to repeat the process on the other side. Remember that piece of leather that we cut earlier and set aside? We're going to now create a silk wrap right over this part right here. I created a bead of glue over those previous macrame knots, and now I'm going to begin to silk wrap. I've taken my 6-inch piece of leather here, and about 2 inches down I've created a loop. I've got a long end and I've got a short end. I'm going to pinch about 2 inches down here, holding the loop at the base of my bracelet. I've got my short end poking out. I'm going to take my long end, wrapping it around the short end as well as all those base cords. What we're going to do is we're going to start the silk wrap here and we're going to move it up. So I've loosely at first started my silk wrap. And if you want to move it down, you can kind of shift it down. You're going to want to take your time with this part. So I'm moving in the direction of the loop. And we do have a silk wrapping video if you want a little bit more detail on how this is done. But moving in the direction of my loop here, I've got 6 wraps. I'm pretty good with that. I'm going to bring it, the tail back through the loop. And I'm going to pull this short end here until I feel it click into the middle, and you can go back and you can adjust this by pulling each end. Just like so. I'm going to take my flush cutters and I'm going to cut here and I'm going to cut right here. And I have a beautiful polished silk wrap. Now it's time to take this whole thing off the board. And where I had those tails coming up, that glue has dried. So I'm not really going to worry about that. What I'm going to do is just kind of hold them off to the side over here. And I'm going to tie an overhand knot with my remaining pieces of leather. So I'm undoing my temporary knot I created at the end. Got my little threads out of the way here. You can bring them up through the middle if you'd like, but it's not essential at this point since that glue is dried. And very carefully, I'm going to create an overhand knot with all of those pieces. Using my tweezers as I tighten it to ensure that all of my leather pieces are creating a nice consecutive coil. Just take your time with this part. You can even pull each piece individually, but you want to slide it down as far as it will go. You can take your tweezers, kind of realign those pieces. Before you tighten all the way, I recommend dabbing some glue inside of here and inside of here. And pull each piece of leather until I like the way that it looks, and it kind of mirrors the silk wrap on the other side. I'm going to cut my leather at an angle so it looks nice and polished. I might even go back and decide that I want to cut it so the angle's going the opposite direction. Then I'm going to take my thread burner and I'm going to burn all of those excess pieces away. Now, we are finished. And we've got a beautiful braided ladder cuff. I'm Brittany Ketchum. Thank you for watching.